So before I get to the main topic of the video, I'd like to give a little background about myself. I started filmmaking in 2011. I did not have any actual formal film school training. Almost all the things that I learned, I actually learned from the internet, like watching YouTube tutorials and etc. And I was making films alone when I started out, like just by my own. I was the actor, the director, everything. And then later, my cousins watched my films and they collaborated with me. I made quite a lot of short films with them as well. And eventually, I went to I was 18 years old, 17 years old. I did music videos with some of my friends. I also collaborated with other filmmakers, and I even mentored with some filmmakers, only like a few, but I still got experience from that. That's the sort of gist of what it is. So for the storyline of the film, I originally thought of the idea for this film around 3 to 4 years ago. Of course, the finished product is not exactly how I imagined it originally, but the core of it is actually from 3 to 4 years ago. And the storyline that I thought up in that time was basically this really depressed hiker. He meets a writer who used to be very famous, but now is having a writer's block. And when they meet, it's almost like a symbiotic relationship. They kind of benefit from each other in a way that's like the hiker gets inspired from the writer, and the writer also gets inspired from the hiker in order to write his story, because the writer is having a writer's block. So I wanted to discuss about these two men, one in his middle age and the other in his like 20s. He's just starting out, but he's really hopeless because of some tragic things that happened to him related to his family. So I really wanted to tell this really hard-hitting story. So originally when I got the offer to make a film, it was actually a short film, but I decided we're getting around 2K USD. Why not just use it for an actual feature film? And also another thing that was happening when we got the finance was that I couldn't think of a good concrete idea for the short film, because every idea kept getting bigger and bigger, and I couldn't really boil it down to just one small idea to turn it into a short film. So I decided, okay, let's just film a feature film. And I began writing. I finished writing the screenplay in about 1.5 months. We went through I think 2 screenplay drafts. And yes, it was kind of rushed, but we were also dealing with a time crunch. The screenplay, I wrote it on a software called Trelby. It's a free screenwriting software. It's very simple to use, and I've been using it for around, let's say, like 3 years. And I do recommend for the filmmakers and beginning filmmakers to use it. When I decided to take the story that I mentioned before, I decided to make it in a way that most of it only happens in just a few locations, and each scene does not have more than 2 actors. This is because if there are more than 2 actors, it's difficult to gather all of them together into one scene. And sometimes, for example, when there's 3 people in the scene or even 4 people, one of them don't show up and you have to cancel the whole scene and you couldn't film it. So it, of course, that's how a lot of other filmmakers make, but usually they have a lot of money and they have a lot of time. But we were making a very low budget feature film, so we couldn't really expect to have a lot of different people coming together and working with us, especially not a lot of actors. So we had to make it in a way that we could manage it. Also, when I cast the actors, all the actors that I cast were people that I worked with before on other films and other short films, etc. And this is so that I can be very certain about their abilities, because this project was the biggest project that I ever undertook. So I had to be certain about each of the person's abilities. And also, this was the first film that I actually hired a separate cinematographer and a separate audiographer instead of doing everything on my own. And this was so that I could collab and sort of diversify and get new voices in there to just in general make a film like how it's made in general, you know, like if you go to Hollywood or even independent films, you don't see just one person doing every single thing. That's why I just wanted to have more people in. And also, this was also the film that I hired a composer to do the score for the film. So I really enjoyed the score. And for this film, we also didn't really storyboard. We instead made several notes and did rehearsals beforehand. For this type of film, storyboards were not really necessary because the film we were making was very, very small, and storyboards were not going to be that useful when most of the film is just dialogue based and it's just close up, and wide shot. It's not really the type of film that requires a lot of like pre-planning in terms of the shots. So I think for our case, we didn't really need a storyboard. One interesting thing that happened in the pre-production is that we didn't get the money on time, so I had to borrow money from my friend, and it was kind of a tense situation, but we did solve it finally. But what happened was that we had to get a stabilizer for a scene that we were going to shoot, but since we didn't have the money yet to buy that stabilizer, I had to borrow money, and eventually we did get all the money. I did pay back my friend, so there's that. So the camera we used for the film is the Canon M50, and it's the camera that I'm using right now. It was a relatively inexpensive camera that I already had, so I didn't have to really go out and rent a camera or even borrow a camera. And the lenses we used were 15 to 45 EF mount lenses, and also the 55 to 100 EF mount lenses, and those came with the camera. So the first day that we went to shoot was actually almost a disaster because there wasn't enough planning. There were a lot of moving parts, and we sort of couldn't keep track of the shots that we were shooting, and we didn't get enough wide shots. And yes, I did say storyboards were not necessary, but I think it is important to at least have a shot list, which we didn't really have on that day. There was also a problem with the budgeting because we spent way too much money on the food on that day, so that made me extra careful on the other days that came about eventually. Also, another problem that we faced was that the actors were not exactly into the character as of yet. Maybe they needed a little more time. As the shooting went on, they did get more into the character. They became more experienced, so that was a good thing. And we had a lot of fun throughout the filming. Thankfully, we did not have any arguments as I thought, because in other big short film shootings, I did have some arguments, I did have fallouts, and it was a really bad experience. But thankfully, we did not have that in this film. But what we did have was there were people that arrived a little too late, and it sort of messed up the timing. And we also had the stabilizer that we were using. It didn't always work the way that we wanted it to. And eventually, after the shooting finished, about a month afterwards, it broke down. So there's that. One of the useful tools that I could share is that when you're not shooting with a storyboard or even a shot list, at least it's important to sort of divide the lines within the script so that you could have like a start time and an end time of when the shot begins and when the shot ends. This is so that you don't just constantly go on shooting and you don't know when to end the shot. You could plan it with your cinematographer or assistant director, or you could also do it on your own if you're just starting out. And it's an important thing to use, I think. For most of the film, we used available lights because we did not really have the resources to get different lights. We even used our phone's flashlights to light a scene when it's way too dark or it's in like a exterior night location. We used our flashlights and just put it up close to the camera. Eventually, there is a problem that you encounter when you're using DSLRs and it's a very low light situation. You gotta bring up the ISO to like 1600 or even more, and that introduces a lot of grain into the image. Or even when you shoot in a lower ISO, when you bring it up in post, there's a lot of grain. For this, how to handle is either you embrace it, like you just say, yeah, this is my film, this is what it is, or you could use different light sources. You could use a better camera. But for us, in our case, we decided to embrace the grain. For one, it's because we didn't have a lot of resources, and another thing is that for this film, it's a very dark film and it's supposed to be very moody because it deals with a drug addict and it deals with some very heavy subjects. So we wanted it to have this grainy look, and it worked in our favor, I believe. And as I mentioned before, we kept our crew to a minimum so that we don't have to deal with a lot of people on the set on the same day and one person not showing up. So that's why we kept the crew to like maximum 4-5 people. Like for example, the cinematographer, the actors, the director, myself, and also the makeup person, the audio. And this is so that you could handle it on the set. And also, in case one of them don't show up, in terms of the crew, I could still go in and fill in that gap when they're not present. Like for example, if the cinematographer is not present on that day due to any circumstance, or the audiographer is not in that day, then I could go in and fill in that gap. So for the editing, we actually edited on the night of each of the shooting day. So if we shoot a scene in the morning, we would edit at night, and I used Premiere Pro. And for the audio, it was actually mixed in a software called Reaper, which was what the audiographer was using. Unfortunately, we did not have the resources and the budget to record on the spot. So instead, we did looping, or what in India they call it dubbing. And it didn't have the best results as I thought it would, because unfortunately, I did not really. I think I rushed it. That's one thing, and also the actors were also not experienced, especially for dubbing, because dubbing is not the same as speaking like this, like speaking into the camera. That's a different deal because you're speaking directly. But for dubbing, you have to record a video first, and then you gotta make sure the lip syncs when you speak for the dubbing. So it's actually pretty difficult unless you have some form of experience and training, at least for like a week or a month. So, but we unfortunately did not really have that time, so we rushed through it. And another one of the reasons why I rushed through it is actually because I wanted to submit it to film festivals. Long story short, we did not win any of the film festivals that we submitted to. We spent about like $400, and eventually we did not win anything. We did not even get considered for anything, except we did get considered for one of the free film festivals, but unfortunately that was sort of more easier to get into, but we did not win it basically. When the dubbing was going on, I was actually, some of the dubbing I was there at the very start, trying to supervise how the actors were performing, but as it went on, I actually went to my part-time job at that time, and I was not able to focus on the dubbing, so I wasn't able to supervise. And the quality, it really does show eventually, because it wasn't in my artistic intent overall. So I want to talk some stuff about film festivals. I personally don't condemn film festivals, but I also think it's not the best route for everyone, especially when you're making something with a very low budget, with a very amateur quality. It's gonna be not the best idea to submit to like really big film festivals. They're not gonna be looking forward to receiving films that have not the best audio quality or the best acting, etc., etc. When you submit to film festivals, there's also sometimes some festivals that are not even real, and it's very important to make sure that they have a proper website with the previous winners listed already. And you also have to be able to contact the film festival organizers. Otherwise, it's not the best idea to submit the film festival to them. And each film festival has its own separate rules, and sometimes you can only submit to one category, and you have to pay separate amount to submit to other categories in the film festival. So you got to make sure and plan out all of it before you actually submit. Overall, you gotta make sure you do all your research, and you gotta make sure all the film festivals that you submit to are real, and make sure you're not submitting to the film festivals that are really high class. Otherwise, it's kind of like just throwing money into the trash. So just final words, please research the film festivals, make sure it is actually something that fits your film. We did have a small release in Hong Kong on the big screen. It was for just one day, and we had our friends gather out, and a few people from outside as well, to witness the big screen premiere of the film. It did release already on Vimeo and YouTube, but for that big screen release, we had to make sure we had Chinese subtitles. Also, overall, it's about giving enough time to the people that help you, because filmmaking is a very long process. If you rush it, it's not going to turn out good. So you got to make sure that you're giving enough time to each and every person, so that it's in the best quality that it could be. So for the world premiere of the film, it was actually done on YouTube and Vimeo. The response was actually pretty good. It's better than I expected. It got a few thousand views by just in a few days. So I was actually very surprised, and the response was also mostly positive. And there were some negative comments, but I understood why it was there. And before the film was released, we did some marketing. We released the trailer. We made several posters. The main poster was made by a poster designer, but the rest of the posters I made it myself, because I kind of have some interest in graphic design myself, even though I'm not claiming to be a big graphic designer or anything like that. I just like to do it. We went to some IG pages to promote the film. One interesting story is that one of the person who was gonna promote the film was actually kind of ripping me off. So I decided not to give him the money. I did not go through with the promotion. So I found someone who had a much better deal, and he also had much more followers, and I'm still following him on IG today. When you promote your film, make sure that the person you're promoting isn't constantly changing the price of the promotion deal, and he's not giving excuses to you. Just make sure that it's very straightforward. So overall, to sum it all up, if you're going to make a feature film, or any film for that matter, I think you got to start with making films according to your skill set. If you're just starting out, just make it little by little. Don't jump into a big film immediately, or even like this 10-minute, 15-minute film. Just try to take it slow. Watch filmmaking tutorials, read books not just related to filmmaking, but also related to just the world in general, and learn about psychology, because psychology is very important when you're trying to write a screenplay, you gotta understand human emotions, why people behave in certain ways, human behavior, you gotta understand that. And even though you're not gonna be a writer, you still have to understand that when you want to be a director. You should also try doing photography, and this would help you come up with better shots. You would be more understanding about your environment, about where to frame the camera. And even though you don't necessarily have to film portrait shots, you could just film landscape. Even just videos are also okay. You could just use your phone, and it's gonna really help you become a better visual sort of storyteller, because filmmaking is very much about telling a story. Without a story, I don't think it's gonna be a very good film. Also, whenever you watch tutorials and a lot of these filmmaking things, you gotta not just watch these tutorials and just that's the end of the story. You gotta learn from those tutorials and put it into practice so that you can have that kind of experience from those tutorials instead of just watching those tutorials and just sort of just being entertained by it, I guess. But I do understand it's very difficult, but I think you can only progress as a filmmaker if you keep putting into practice about what you know and what you have learned. And even though you might think, yes, I could just pick up a camera and just go filming the very next day or the very next minute, it's very important to do that groundwork. And I personally, I had to do 7 years of groundwork from 2011. I've made a lot of short films. A lot of them were not really that great, but I still put in that effort and put in that practice so that I could be where I am right now. And it's very important for people starting out and even people who have experience. It's important to not just rush into it. Just you gotta take it slow. Otherwise, you're just gonna put really huge expectations on yourself, and you're gonna fail and just become really disappointed. So just take it slow. Also, one of the things that you could do is keep your budget of the film to a minimum, and also the time. Also try to not make the film for, like, let's say if it's a short film, I think it's best not to go for it more than a few months. Otherwise, especially when you're working with people that you're not paying, when they're just filming as a voluntary work, you cannot really expect them to have that level of commitment that you have, because they're just doing it for fun. So you gotta not pressure them or force them into doing it for a really long time, or pressure them into doing some really crazy things. Otherwise, they're not really gonna be wanting to work with you. And you gotta make sure that they're getting something in return as well, whether it's food or money. Even a little money is I think food is more important. Food, and you gotta not like, you gotta be friendly with them overall. You can't just like boss them around. You gotta make sure it's a friendly environment where everyone can express themselves in a free way. And also, when you hire people, you can't just hire people that you think will be good or they're just your friends. You got to make sure that they could put in that work rather than just talking about the work and just saying, yeah, I can do this, yeah, I can do that. It's really about making sure that that person is able to be trustworthy. And sometimes some people are, you hire your friends, sometimes they're not trustworthy, or you even hire some people that you don't know but you think they're really good. I think it's important to make sure that to make sure that they're actually in the same wavelength as you, because some people, they might have good skills, but it's very difficult to work with them because they might have, let's say they might have an attitude, or they might have a very high expectation of you, or they might not really take anything seriously. or even they might not take you seriously, or they might think you're not worth it, or anything like that. You got to make sure that you're working with people that respect you, and also people that you could respect. And for your first film, or even your first feature film, whatever it is, don't expect it to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. I think filmmaking is really a matter of keep gotta keep doing it in order to eventually be perfect. Like, for example, you might make a perfect film when it's your second or third feature film rather than your first. Or even your short film, your very first short film is gonna be bad no matter what. So you gotta make sure that you're not focusing on making it perfect, but you're focusing on learning from it. And there's nothing wrong in keep putting it out there as well. And sometimes the criticism is going to be harsh, sometimes the criticism is going to be too much, but it's all about the process. You got to learn from it eventually, and you eventually make something good. And also for your first feature film, I do recommend that you make a film that is important to you. The story that you tell is important, so that through all the trials and tribulations that you go through when making the film, you don't give up, because you want to tell that story. You want to get that story out, and because of that, you don't give up on the film. It's not just like you want to make a film, so you make a film. Instead, it's something that's personal to you, and you are more focused on the story, and you want to tell that story. You want to bring that story out as good as possible. And even though it might not really be perfect, you're still telling that story, and that's my advice. And also, at the very end of the day, it's all about getting the film made. Otherwise, you can't just wait for things to be perfect. You can't wait for the stars to get aligned. You gotta just, sometimes you just go in for it and finish it all the way through, no matter what. Even though you gotta make some compromises, you just make those compromises and get that film done. And that's my advice. So that's it for today. I'm Rizwan. I'll see you guys in the next video.